The creepypasta genre of storytelling is one that I grew up during the peak of. I remember being in elementary school reading stories that I almost definitely should not have been reading, mostly just because it was the only real horror content that I had access to that wasn't limited to being like a Markiplier video or something like that. I would listen to YouTubers reading out creepypastas or horror stories while I was busy doodling FNAF drawings or something like that, and let me tell you,
it was perfect. Perfect.
With such a simple yet strong premise, it might be easy to think that this storytelling format would still be around today, but sadly that just isn't the case. I mean, you still see elements of it around with regards to horror media today, but it's mostly just a shadow of its former self, lost of the simplicity that initially made the genre so compelling. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the creepypasta genre as a whole, what went wrong with it, and where we can still see elements of it around today. You know, I was initially gonna do this video as an iceberg, but holy Jesus, those are a lot of work, so I don't wanna. Also, I've just gotta apologize for the long downtime between the last video and this one. I upgraded from a laptop to a PC, so I've been playing a lot of like Red Dead and Ultra Kill, and I also have a job, so I've just been sleeping when I have free time. But I do have to give a big thanks to you guys for helping me hit over 13K as of writing this video. That is such an insane number to me, and it's quite literally a goal that I would never have dreamed of reaching. But thanks to your guys' support, what started out as a hobby initially is now something that I'm more than happy to share with you guys. So again, thank you all so much for your support, and let's get into the video.
Excuse me, would you like to try my smoked meat log?
As with most things that began on the internet, it's not very simple to pinpoint the exact start of the genre. If we're going purely by the first appearance of the word, it would have been in 2007 when the word emerged as a play on the term copypasta on the famous self-help website 4chan, with the similarly named Creepypasta Wiki being created 3 years later in 2010. However, a large portion of people, myself included, point to the incredibly well put together story Ted the Caver as the proprietor of the genre in the year of our Lord and Savior 2001. For the uninitiated, Ted the Caver is a horror story following the titular Ted the Caver as he documents his repeated attempts at exploring a cave through a series of blog posts, with each subsequent attempt resulting in a growing sense of paranoia and fear in Ted, perhaps rightfully so. I won't spoil the ending for those of you who wish to read it, but oh my goodness is Ted the Caver a genuinely really cool horror story, and for those of you who have already read it, you know just how cool the ending is. Now, at the time of its creation, Ted the Caver obviously wasn't considered a creepypasta as the term hadn't quite yet been pioneered, but after the term became popularized, it was retroactively considered one, and in my opinion, stands as one of the best creepypasta stories there is, which is in stark contrast to many of the stories created later in the term's lifespan. But from around 2007 to mid-2012, the term was mostly being applied to a very limited array of very quality short horror stories that were popular in the public eye. Now, this period is what I would like to call the Golden Age for creepypasta, and it was when I was introduced to the genre. As I'm sure is the case with many people, I was introduced to the genre through the 2012 video game Slender the 8 Pages when my uncle decided to have me play it at the ripe old age of 7. The Slender Man himself had a large effect on my early childhood, with me being simultaneously fascinated and horrified by him. I've told the story before, but I can vividly remember watching a mockumentary about him when I had the flu, and not realizing that it was a mockumentary, I convinced myself that he was real. In hindsight, I was definitely the kind of idiot to think that it says gullible on the ceiling, but whatever. And it was through the outlet of Let's Plays on YouTube that I got my introduction to a lot of the most important figures and stories in the genre. Now, if I had to include every single creepypasta story in this video that got popular, we would be here literally all day. So instead, I've picked 4 creepypastas here that I would argue are the most broadly influential stories of the genre. Slender Man is such an interesting character to me even today, largely because there isn't really an agreed upon mythos for the character. I mean, sure, there's the really bad movie and Slender the Arrival, which is just okay, but I think he works better as the amalgamation of fan interpretation that he really is nowadays, which I think is pretty cool. He now largely acts as a modern day folktale with several characters in both movies and video games that just sort of mirror what the Slender Man was at the height of his popularity, which I'll go into more detail about later. Unfortunately though, the character isn't really used nowadays because, you know, that one thing that happened that one time, and because Sony was stupid and fumbled the character in a way that I didn't even think was possible. But nonetheless, he is easily the most iconic creepypasta character, besides that one guy, we'll get to him in a second, and I hope that people revisit him again sometime in the near future, as current Slenderman projects such as Morley Grove have been super cool to keep up with. Another popular creepypasta from the time is Smile Dog. I wasn't even gonna explain the lore of this one initially, as I had figured that most people had heard about it, but upon discussing it with my girlfriend, I realized, you know, I might need to explain it a little. Smile Dog is a story that preys upon the mostly outdated fear of chainmail. The narrator of the story finds out about a supposedly cursed image and reaches out to a woman who has seen it and been haunted by it ever since. The woman is rightfully like, nuh-uh, but the narrator ends up getting the image anyways and realizes that she may be cooked. It's a pretty simple story, but an effective one at that. And while nowadays cognito hazards are a very common topic in horror media, Smile Dog stands as a pretty early example of cognito hazard-esque media at a time where it wasn't necessarily so common. By the way, if you're at all interested in the story, even if you've already read it, I would love to recommend Chainmail Chasers, as it is one of my current favorite bits of internet horror media. Ben Drowned is a really cool example of a haunted video game creepypasta, and I think it's one of the only ones that truly does it really well. It's got all the classic makings of a good haunted video game story. A guy gets a haunted cartridge with a kid's name on it. Spoiler alert, the kid's name was Ben and he drowned. And then some spooky shit entails, and we have some pretty cool footage to accompany the story. Now, I've got to be honest, I wasn't too big on this story growing up, primarily because I wasn't really into the Zelda games until I was much older. But it is really cool to look back upon, seeing as there is so much content for this particular story. And while it's not my favorite of the subgenre of haunted video game stories, I think it is objectively the most important of its kind for the genre. Lastly, and probably least, we have Jeff the Killer. Jeff. What is there to be said about this story that hasn't already been said? Edgelord self-insert Jeff moves into a quote nice neighborhood, runs into some bullies who have a questionable arsenal for their age. Jeff fucking low diffs them, gets into trouble with the cops, except not really because his brother goes to jail instead. Somehow he gets white skin and black hair because I guess that's how being burned works, and now he's crazy. My favorite detail of this story is how when Jeff's mom discovers what her son has done to himself, she immediately runs to her husband and tells him to get the gun. Anyways, Jeff then slaughters his family, and that's the end of the story. In case it isn't obvious by how I quite favorably portrayed the story, I'm not really the biggest fan of Jeff. It sucks too, because the image for him is legitimately pretty cool and unsettling, as well as being the subject of one of the largest internet manhunts with regard to the origin of the image, but the quality of the story severely hinders any actual scares that could be had long term. Now, if you were to build a creepypasta Mount Rushmore, I thoroughly believe that these four would be on it. Although Jeff only really becomes important later, but whatever. These stories resulted in the spawning of some of the most popular subgenres of creepypasta by merely existing. And while yes, these are not the only genres of creepypasta, as you have popular stories like the Russian Sleep Experiment, Pen Pals, and a lot of really, and I mean really bad Lost Tapes creepypasta horror stories. With the exception of the last category, these are mostly just one-off stories, with the rest of the popular creepypastas coming out in the wake of the Golden Age, mainly consisting of stories from the four pillar genres. And for a time, the creepypasta genre as a whole largely consisted of quality stories getting popular. And so I want to take the time here to briefly talk about three of my personal favorite creepypasta stories because I do what I want. In a world full of Lovecraftian beings and anomalous entities hell-bent on having their fear factor being super overwhelming, we have a more subtle little dubious creature in the form of Mr. Widemouth. Now, while being a popular story on its own, relative to the rest of the genre, this story is pretty niche, but I have a deep-seated nostalgia for it. I listened to a YouTuber read out the story and thought it was super cool as a kid, and even upon reading it back for the first time in over a decade, it is still pretty cool to me. For those who are unaware, Mr. Widemouth follows a young boy who has fallen ill to mono after he meets this mischievous little dude, Mr. Widemouth. Throughout the story, Mr. Widemouth essentially tries time and time again to trick the boy into offing himself, but after a time, the boy moves away, with the titular creature watching from a window as he leaves. Sometime later, the boy returns to his childhood home, now a man, and upon visiting the forest nearby his house, discovers the graves of several children who had all previously fallen victim to the creature, realizing that the boy nearly shared the same fate. The story is super short and simple, but I love it all the same. It's super cool to see a villain in a creepypasta that isn't an omnipotent or unstoppable force of evil, but rather a manipulative one that instead tries to deceive a young boy through the power of gaslighting and trolling. I know I just super spoiled the story, but go give it a read if you're interested. Now, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have NES Godzilla. NES Godzilla is my personal favorite of the haunted video game subgenre. The story features some incredibly cool sprites and screenshots from the game, and is overall just a very cool take on the haunted video game subgenre, as the narrator slowly becomes aware of the fact that this game is something more than just your average haunted video game experience, but rather something more sinister and overwhelming to deal with. Plus, Red is such a cool villain both in looks and lore-wise, and any bit of summary that I could attempt to do for this story just would not do it justice. Go read it when you get the chance. It's a really long story, but it's really cool. The Harbinger Experiment stands as the pinnacle of Russian Sleep Experiment-inspired creepypastas in my humble opinion. This is a story that explores the inherent malice of the human heart in a really cool way, following a narrator as he takes part in an experiment overseen by a mysterious man known only as Zimmerman. As the story progresses, we essentially get to see the purest form of evil manifest itself in one of the test subjects, but by the time Zimmerman has gotten the results he wanted, we are all cooked. It's too late. It's another story that is super hard to do justice, as the narrator's growing sense of fear and regret for partaking in this experiment is one of the coolest parts about this story. So again, please make sure to give this a read if you have even the slightest bit of interest in it. So why did I bring these stories up? Well, one, it's my video and I do what I want, but two, I also just wanted to express that both inside and outside of the Mount Rushmore of creepypasta genres, there was, in my opinion, a lot of really cool content to be read if you were willing to put in the effort to look for it. You could pick one of the uber popular ones that literally everyone knew, or you could dig a little deeper and occasionally find actual peak. And for a long time, it was perfect, with these nations living peacefully in harmony. Then, everything changed when the shitty Jeff the Killer clones attacked. Holy shit. There are so many Jeff clones that it would be nearly impossible to talk about them all, but somehow, someway, Jeff's edgelord Bates story paired with popular image of him tickled nearly every 13-year-old's brain just enough to where suddenly there were nearly as many Jeff clones throughout the early to mid 2010s as there are predators on Twitch. From Eyeless Jack, the really confusing story that serves as a cautionary tale about squatters' rights, to Jane the Killer, Jeff's love interest or mortal enemy, to Laughing Jack, a more cannibalistic dream demon type thing, I don't even know. The list goes on and on and on and on, with each continuous iteration of the character coming with its own set of new problems, which were just stacked upon the problems that came with the original story. But these problems were ignored and instead seemingly amplified because the character's designs appealed to that weird phase of the internet where everybody's Minecraft skin looked like this. Now, I'm not even gonna lie, being a young kid myself who couldn't really discern quality at the time, I found myself enjoying a lot of these stories, which I think is also the case for many people who also grew up with the genre. But being an adult now and having the benefit of witnessing the genre's progression in real time, it is fairly easy to see that the quality of many creepypasta stories as a whole started to rapidly decrease as the genre shifted its focus towards making characters that will catch your eye rather than making stories that are worthwhile. And this is not to put down any people who were first-time writers using this genre as an outlet to explore their interest in creative writing. Everybody has to get a start somewhere, and with Jeff being so popular at the time, it's not crazy to think that many people used him as an inspiration for their works. But from the perspective of someone who actively searched for and consumed this sort of media, when something gets so popular that nearly everyone wants a piece of the pie, it's only natural when a lot of it becomes just not good. And around the time that a lot of the genre just became general slop, came the decrease in popularity for creepypasta as a whole. Now, it's hard to pinpoint the exact date of death for creepypasta, but if I had to pick just one moment, it would be the...
But, do you know what isn't neat? Your wife leaving you.
JC the Hyena is a name that, for many, is quite frankly not familiar in the slightest. But for some, the name lives in incredible infamy. For those who are unaware, JC the Hyena is the creator of the now infamous shitpost Sonic.exe. Sonic.exe is an extremely generic haunted video game creepypasta that only really got popularity because of a combination of being super edgy with the hyper-realistic blood stuff, and because there was a companion video game that was pretty much just catered towards the unedited Let's Play format that was so popular in the early 2010s. Now, of course, with all media that doesn't really deserve the popularity it gets, the fucking monkey's paw of storytelling curled and allowed for the birthing of 20 billion .exe creepypastas after the release of this story. But as with all empires, they must one day come to an end, and Sonic.exe was removed from the creepypasta wiki for being generally bad, to which its creator responded with careful consideration and restraint. Now, allow me to read the first 6 lines for you. I deeply regret to inform you all that I have received some bad news. The admins of the creepypasta wiki have finally decided to delete Sonic.exe off of the wiki on the grounds that it was badly written and had too many cliches and was a bad example of what a creepypasta should be. Full freaking horseshit. As you can see, I am furious with the fact that my masterpiece, which has won the hearts of millions and has made a massive impact on the internet, is being brought down by a bunch of jealous, arrogant, can't say that word on the internet, furry haters. Where have I heard this one before? Anyways, you can find the creator's full post through a simple Google search, but in spite of his beautiful and poetic way with words, many reasonable people found this kinda cringe. And in retrospect, this one post acts as a time capsule for that era of creepypasta that was just generally considered to be cringe by the public, and also the start of the general decline of creepypasta. Now, as with anything that exists on the internet, there would be little semblances of the genre, with people like Mr. Nightmare and Corpse Husband continuing their readings of online horror stories to their channel to a surprising amount of success given the general decline that surrounded them. But for a bit, this remained the only real bit of creepypasta storytelling that remained popular on the internet. And in spite of some creepypasta-inspired video games, this is largely where the genre as a whole remains to this day. Now, of course, you'll still occasionally see internet horror stories pop up every now and then, but the creepypasta genre as a whole largely shifted towards mediums like analog horror and short-form videos with ambiguous stories and cheap jump scares. And while things like analog horror are still pretty cool to me, I think there's a part of me that just kinda misses that classic pre-Jeff the Killer type horror story. In the past few years, there's only really one character that I can say feels emblematic of that classic creepypasta feel. But its decline in popularity also shows one of the other problems that I believe was responsible in the downfall of creepypasta, and can also be a big problem in the horror medium as a whole. With this character being... During the end times of 2020, several people, myself included, were introduced to the beautiful artwork of Trevor Henderson, and subsequently the character of Siren Head. Siren Head is the only character in recent years to really capture that creepypasta charm in my opinion, essentially acting as this decade's Slender Man. Siren Head had a more defined set of lore courtesy of its intuitive design and the little tidbits of lore that Henderson himself would give about the character, but a lot of the lore that people associate with it nowadays comes from fan interpretations and video games created during the height of its popularity. Siren Head, though, entails what I think may be the biggest problem with making a horror character other than leaning too hard into being edgy, which is a phenomenon that I'd like to call Pyramid Head Syndrome. For those who have not had the fortune to play Absolute Peak, Pyramid Head is the primary antagonist of Silent Hill 2 and is not only an absolute triumph of storytelling and character design, but also a character that only really works well in the context of Silent Hill 2, being a manifestation of main character James Sunderland's inner guilt and desire to be punished, not in a freaky way, as a result of his biggest regrets. The character is essentially tailor-made for the story of Silent Hill 2, yet despite its creator's wishes, Pyramid Head was essentially crammed into every other piece of media that Capcom could fit him into because,
hello, I like money,
resulting in subsequent iterations actively hindering the integrity of the character as a whole. Even portrayals of him that I don't really mind more than others, like his lore portrayal in hit awful video game Dead by Daylight, these all still feature a fundamental disconnect from the most important aspects of the character. And this is all without including fan-made content that is into the character for a different reason. Now, you may be asking, why do I bring this up? Well, my dear hypothetical viewer that I made up for this exact scenario, it's because it's not just creepypasta characters that fall victim to this, but also a lot of professionally produced horror stories and characters. Both good and bad stories will eventually see their character picked apart and forced into less than stellar adaptations for the sake of milking as much content of the character as possible. Now, this is sort of inevitable if you have something actually good on your hands, as people will always want more, but it is incredibly important to be able to make the distinction between, I think I have a potentially interesting new avenue to explore a character, and I am making more for the sake of making more. And with the current state of creepypasta-inspired media being restricted to mainly games and online horror video series, we are already seeing these avenues nearly being exploited to their limits, to the point where any current continuations of this sort of format can already feel a little stale for someone who isn't willing to dedicate all of their time to explore an already limited avenue of horror media. Now, in spite of these issues, both ones that I stated and ones that I didn't have time for, I cannot state it enough just how much of a fondness I hold in my heart for the creepypasta genre as a whole. It played a large part in my formative years and is one of many key players in my overall affinity for the horror genre now that I'm older. And although the genre is essentially dead, the impact that it has had on this generation of horror entertainment is very hard to overstate, as the media that it's produced and inspired will continue to shape the tastes of many new horror fans when we were their age. And in spite of the many less than desirable elements of the genre, and the admittedly many easy pitfalls there are to be aware of, I really hope to see some of these characters and avenues of storytelling explored in the near future. But as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I am so sorry again about the downtime between this video and the last one, but I will try to be more consistent going forward. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any thoughts or stories that I may have missed, as I only spoke about a few, make sure to leave them in the comments below. And if you want to keep up to date on my uploads and what's going on behind the scenes, make sure to join my Discord server in the link in the description below. Anyways, that's enough yapping for now. Thank you all so much, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye!